Hi class, today we're going to talk about the Han Dynasty and Imperial Rome. Most of us have learned a little bit about the Roman Republic and the Roman Empire, but what about the Han? Were they superior in any way to the Romans? Were they bigger, badder, better? We shall see. A Greek historian living in the 2nd century BCE asked this about the Roman Empire. Who is so thoughtless and lazy that he does not want to know in what way and with what kind of government the Romans, in less than 53 years, conquered nearly the entire inhabited world and brought it under their rule, the achievement previously unheard of? Now, was that unheard of? The Persians had done the same thing, right, with their great empire, and Alexander the Great had conquered many territories in even shorter amount of time. Or was it that Romans were far superior culture and military and everything? No. Even the Romans admitted that their art, their literature, their philosophy, and culture came straight from the Greeks. What made Rome's achievement unique was not only their ability to conquer many peoples, but to also incorporate them into the entire Roman system. Unlike the Greeks who refused to share citizenship, the Romans extended citizenship to conquered peoples, and with that citizenship class, they were going to be subject to Roman government and law, and with this, they must obey. Rome is able to create what some have called a world state that included the entire Mediterranean and beyond. London, Paris, Vienna, many other modern European cities will begin as a Roman colony. And when the founding fathers created the American Republic, they looked to Rome as a model. According to your textbook, without Rome, European civilization as we know it would not exist. But first, let's see how the Han and the Romans compare. What we're going to see is that flourishing right about the same time, the Han China and the Roman Empire becomes powerful and enduring, according to the textbook, a globalizing type empire. Now, the Han Dynasty, building on the Qin foundations that we've already talked about, establishes a bureaucratic imperial model and a social order for East Asia. And the Roman Empire becomes a Mediterranean superpower, exerting far-reaching political, legal, economic, and cultural influences. They had some things in common. Their enormous size, land, military, society, citizenship. They had huge, diverse populations, foreigners, immigrants, and the like. Their influence was felt far beyond their own borders. And their commitment to integrate conquered peoples into their culture and their economies and under their administrative control was fairly common with both empires. Class, 25% of all human beings in the Afro-Eurasia fell under China or Rome's authority during this time. Now, there'll be some things different about each society. They're going to have different patterns of development. What's going to look best for the society? What will look best for each one? Civilian, magistrate, and bureaucratic type government in the Han Empire, they were all servants to the public. Citizenship was important. Soldiers and military ruled in the Roman Empire. The Han Empire modeled on a past empire. Let's look backwards. Confucianism, it's going to make a comeback. And Rome is going to begin collectively as a ruled city-state system and expand into creating something new, making a lot of pragmatic type decisions. Now, both empires unite huge landmass, diverse populations, and have economies based on agrarian-based type. They have peasants in China, typically free peasants working the land in China, but enslaved populations work the fields in the Roman Empire. Both are going to become models for future states and a new level of bureaucratic and military complexity. Both will use a common legal framework, and we still use the basis of the Roman law in the United States today. So the Han Dynasty is going to rule China from 206 BCE to 220 AD and was the second imperial dynasty of China. Now, they're going to have these dramas within their royal courts, and they're also going to be known for promoting Confucianism as the state religion. They're also going to continue to open up the Silk Road further and and take the trade route all the way into Europe. And they're going to permanently alter the course of Chinese history, the Han Dynasty will. Han Dynasty art and inventions like paper still influence the world today. Liu Bang, who was born a peasant, is going to lead a group of generals to overthrow the Qin Dynasty. And this started a 400-year period of prosperity, sometimes referred to as China's Golden Age. Now later, martial Emperor Han Wudi will lead the Han Dynasty to superpower status, and their capital of the dynasty was one of the biggest cities in the world at the time. The Han Dynasty saw a massive territorial expansion, with China's area almost doubling under the Han Dynasty. So remember Confucianism, we've talked about it, and under the Qin Dynasty, it will be suppressed, but it's going to come back. And Confucianism will rise to become the state philosophy of China's aristocracy. Officials will be evaluated on their conduct according to Confucian philosophy. And Han Wudi establishes an imperial university to train them. Han Wudi also follows Taoist principles as well as a little legalism that we've talked about. And it's going to be during the Han period that Buddhism will spread to China. And remember, Buddhism's new emphasis is on universal salvation, and it really appeals to the masses. So along with Confucianism and Taoism, Buddhism becomes one of China's three main religions that will dominate the face of Chinese people for the next 2,000 years. Now, Han Wudi was a military opportunist, and he invaded Vietnam and Korea, subjecting them to Han rule. So again, China will almost double in size during the Han Dynasty. These are some artifacts uncovered from the Han era, and the photo in the bottom corner is a Han Dynasty rammed earth watchtower that's still in existence today. Now, they did have their problems. The Xiongnu proved to be the most serious military threat to the Han Dynasty. And who were the Xiongnu? They were these nomadic warriors from the Mongolian steppe region. They were superb horseman class that could shoot rats as targets from far away. Their weapons were not as sophisticated as Han, but their mobility gave them an advantage. They had no cities. They could disappear and spread out very quickly. And the Xiongnu, had brutal leadership. They were not to be trifled with. Now, at first, Han Wudi would pay them tribute. Relations with the Han is going to prove to be very complex for the Xiongnu, and there's going to be repeated periods of military conflict and intrigue, alternating with exchanges of tribute, trade, and marriage treaties. Eventually, Emperor Wudi is going to launch an offensive campaign against them, eventually splitting the Xiongnu tribes in half. Over time, some of their tribes even became middlemen on the Silk Road for China. During this time, there's also going to be these significant advances in science and technology. From the Imperial University, they normally had up to 30,000 scholars at any given time, producing literature, poetry, art, and advancements in things like paper. And class, this scholarship in China is going to dwarf any of the Roman efforts. Pax Seneca, or Chinese peace, is a period of time that is defined by the expansion, prosperity, and flourishing of the Silk Road from about 149 to 87 BCE. So how important is the legacy of the Silk Road? Class, just to show you the connection between the past and the present, in 2017, China's President Xi Jinping announced that there's a new Silk Road being sponsored by China. So we're going to take a couple of minutes and watch this short video to see how China plans on using the new Silk Road they want to create. Class, by 220 of the Common Era, the Han Dynasty will be in decline, and several things are going to lead to this collapse. Financial expenditures drain the empire, natural disasters lead to crop failures, and peasant farmers will begin to rebel. And there will be some attempts at social reforms. You can read about that in the textbook, but ultimately, between the peasant resistance and even the Yellow River, again changing her course, the Han Dynasty is not going to recover. And one of the rebellions is called the Yellow Turban Uprising, and rebels wore yellow turbans, and it lasted 21 years over an agrarian crisis. And they're going to wage war on the Han Dynasty under the leadership of an extremist religious type groups who champion some Taoist ideals. Now, the Han Dynasty will be further weakened by court intrigue, and one revolt was led by the court eunuchs who had gained much power. Eventually, this will be put down, and over 2,000 eunuchs are killed. But after the decline of the Han Dynasty, the Han states, 3 states are going to replace the Han. And it's going to be, this division is going to look similar to what happens to Rome after their eventual collapse. There will be no reunification for several centuries in China. And finally, I want to take a minute and talk about Han society and the elements that make up their society and what makes them unique. Of course, it was a patriarchal society as well as being very stratified. The Confucius classical work, the Classic of Filial Piety, is going to reinforce the subordination to elder males and the 3 submissions. And what's the 3 submissions? Women and children were always to first obey their husband, their father, or their sons if they were widowed. Chinese women, as a general rule, were always subordinate to men. A bride's father arranged her marriage and must provide a dowry to her husband's family. So daughters were often seen by their parents as a burden. Thus, they were treated as inferior to boys, and young women were trained chiefly to serve as wives and mothers. Class, in Chinese script, the character for a wife is a woman using a broom. One exception for women during the Han Dynasty is going to be Banzhou, and she was a famous female scholar in China. She was a historian and a philosopher and poet, and she also dabbled in politics. She demanded education for both girls and boys. Still, she agreed with the classic filial piety, but said that girls will better serve their husbands if they are educated. Now, the lives of rural peasants were very confined, and in theory, farmers were valued since the food they grew was vital to survival, and Confucianism's social order ranked farmers higher than merchants. But the reality class is different. Most peasants lived in poverty, in villages of wood and bamboo huts, toiling in their service to wealthy landowners. Peasants also had to pay taxes, provide periodic labor for public work projects, and usually served in the military. So you can see why they would periodically rebel. Slave life also proved to be difficult, yet interestingly, the Han had laws limiting the number of slaves you could own. For example, a king could own 200 slaves, but an official could only own 30. So why do you think that is, class? Why would they limit the number of slaves? Clearly, they were very concerned about slave uprisings and wanted to keep their numbers low. Urban life was very diverse and sophisticated. They had metropolitan populations approaching 250,000 people. Major cities had palaces and parks and marketplaces and temples. They had a wide variety of entertainment, like music and art and poetry, and they also had magic shows, juggling acts, and puppet performances. Yet there was a seamy side of life to these big cities. There were gambling houses, brothels, and gangs of youth were known to roam the streets. Public executions designed to deter crime and disloyalty typically attracted large crowds, and the Han would often place criminals in positions of doing hard labor while their families would be seized and kept as property by the government. The Han also used a preferred method of castration many times as punishment for crimes. So class, between the Qin and the Han dynasties, They consolidated much of the population of East Asia into one large regional empire by the last 2 centuries of the first millennium BCE. The Han's going to push the boundaries further by 210 BCE. And next, we're going to take a look at the Roman dynasty to see how they created their superpower status. So next up, the Roman Empire.